Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar today aimed at Northern Ireland packaging producers. My name is Janice Harris, and I'm the Assistant Director of Environmental Resources Policy in DERA. Part of my remit is EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging, which is what we're here talking about today. Today we'll be providing information on the new packaging data requirements for EPR and also giving a general update on the deposit return scheme for drinks containers, which is due to launch in late 2025. We've quite the panel today. We have Charmaine Beer, Leslie Roberts, Christine Taggart and Robert McLaughlin, all from our packaging policy team. And we also have Diane Carlisle, one of the regulators for packaging from NIA here as well today. And I shouldn't forget our webinar host for today, that's Amy Scott, who's also from the packaging policy team. Next slide, please, Amy. So here we have this afternoon's agenda, and we're planning to run for about an hour and a half today. And we've also left plenty of time for your questions in this session. We will have a presentation first on data requirements for packaging, EPR, followed by a Q&A session, then a presentation on the deposit return scheme for drinks containers and a Q&A slot after that too. We also hope to have some time at the end for a final mop-up Q&A, picking up anything that we haven't answered in the other sessions. Next slide, please, Amy. So a quick word on domestics then. Please be advised that the webinar is being recorded today. The recording will be made available on our EPR webpage following this event, along with the presentation slides. And also, due to data protection, you, the external participants, will not be visible or audible and will not be able to see each other's questions. Should you have a question at any point through the webinar, please feel free to ask it via the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen by directing your question to all panelists. We'll try to answer all questions during this webinar, but if there are any that we don't get to in time, we will put the answers to those onto our EPR webpage after the event. Next slide, please, Amy. So to kick things off for today, we have a poll question in which we're asking you, how prepared do you feel for packaging EPR on a scale between 1 to 5? So to answer, please use the poll panel, which should appear on the right-hand side of your screen. And while you're answering that, just a word on how we're working to help you meet your new obligations, how we're engaging as packaging EPR progresses. We've been doing this in a number of ways. We keep our DERA webpage up to date with the latest guidance on getting ready, including an obligations checker to help businesses understand their obligations. We participate in a fortnightly UK-wide business readiness forum, which gives you the opportunity to raise questions and issues. And we're also running topic-specific webinars, the first of which covered household and non-household packaging definitions, and subsequent webinars will focus on data reporting and nation-specific data and sales. But the EPR and DRS newsletter is the best way to get webinar invites for these events. So if you're not already subscribed, we've put the link into the slide deck for today. And we do know that this is a lot of complicated information. So we're aiming here today to work through some of that detail with you. But we'd also like to know if there are any other areas of the regime where you would like more webinars in the future. So I think that poll closed there. So Amy, could you please let us have the results of the poll?
Yes, no problem, Janice. So I think for the next time I'll let the poll run for a little bit longer because we only got 50% people responding there. But half of those who responded said they feel moderately prepared, with everybody else sitting in the 1 to 2 category, so not very prepared, and some not at all as well.
Thanks very much, Amy. Really not surprising given the scale of change here that most people don't feel ready for the new requirements. But, you know, we aim to help preparedness through this webinar and future ones too. Thank you. Next slide, please, Amy. So first off, just quickly to add some context to this pretty technical session today, basically why are we doing EPR and DRS here in Northern Ireland? So we've got to this point today because certain waste streams have been prioritised by our previous minister, for which EPR is to be explored, and packaging is one of these waste streams. And the point of this work on packaging is really to bring about a system change so that wastage is reduced at every level of the waste hierarchy to stop unnecessary extraction of raw materials and unnecessary energy use. This sort of policy isn't so much about recycling rates, it's more about a system change so that waste is designed out from the product design stage through production, sale, consumption and disposal, so that we're moving into circular resource use in the packaging life cycle. In other words, we're trying to get as close as we can to a circular economy for packaging. And this work stream fits well with key goals of the Northern Ireland Executive, in particular through various strategies. The Green Growth Strategy, which is about ensuring that climate action, a green economy and environmental considerations are embedded into our policy decision making across the public sector. The Circular Economy Strategy, which is out for consultation at the moment until the 20th of March, and is about creating an economy where business, people and the planet flourish with responsible production and consumption at the core. And then our own environment strategy, which sets out our response to the range of local environmental challenges in Northern Ireland, and it particularly includes actions to bring forward the systems for EPR for packaging as well as DRS. So as well as these existing strategies, we're also in the process of developing a new waste management strategy for Northern Ireland. Some of you might have been at the workshops or seen the webcasts for this work. And our EPR work streams, including this one for packaging, will form the bedrock for that waste management strategy. They'll be instrumental in delivering sustainable waste management practices, and this in turn contributes to a circular economy in Northern Ireland with other key policies, particularly on the recycling side of things, supporting this work. Next slide, please, Amy. So now just another quick poll before we hear from our first panel member. As mentioned, we have developed an online obligation checker, which will let you know whether you have an obligation in the new EPR regime. And what we'd like to know is simply whether or not you've used it. And if you could let us know by answering the poll on the right-hand side of your screen, that would be really helpful. While you're answering that, I'll take the opportunity to introduce Christine Taggart, who works in our packaging EPR team here in Dara, and she will take us through the new packaging data requirements. Following that presentation, Leslie Roberts will also join the panel for questions along with Diane Carlisle, the regulator from Northern Ireland Environment Agency. Now, I see we're still polling, Amy, so we need to wait a little second before that closes, do we?
Yes, it's just on for a couple more seconds, but at the minute, it's looking like the majority of answers are no, and but it's close. So we've got 23% answering yes, 37% answering no, and 40% just haven't put anything in yet. So maybe it's something people haven't been aware of yet, or maybe haven't got the chance to use yet. But that's
Thank you, Amy.
finished. Thank you.
Well, the message for us is that we're quite right to put it into these slides then for people to have a look at. Thank you. Next slide then, please, Amy. So over to Christine then, please.
Good afternoon. As Janice said, my name is Christine Taggart and I work in the policy team in packaging. Today I'll be giving an update on data reporting requirements under packaging extended producer responsibility. Next slide, please, Amy. Consultations took place in 2019 and 2021, and the government response was published in March 2022. Extensive stakeholder engagement on implementation design is ongoing. For packaging EPR, the responsibility for full life cycle of packaging and household waste is placed on those businesses that put material onto the market, and that's the producer pays principle. EPR for packaging will be run by a scheme administrator who will calculate council payments and invoice producer fees. Next slide, please, Amy. The implementation of the reform to the current UK packaging regime will be through legislation. This comprises of a new UK-wide statutory instrument which will revoke the 2007 Packaging Waste Regulations, both in Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and bring in the new requirements. A new data statutory rule will require producers to collate packaging data preceding EPR coming into operation. These regulations are for Northern Ireland and mirror those in the rest of Great Britain. You should have all received a link to these regulations with invitation to this webinar, and this rule comes into operation in March 2023. England, Scotland and Wales will be amending their current regulations on material facilities to include the new sampling and compositional requirements under EPR. As Northern Ireland does not currently have equivalent regulations, new legislation will be introduced ensuring uniformity across the UK. Northern Ireland businesses will be given a lead in time, guidance and stakeholder engagement to support with these new requirements. Stakeholder engagement sessions have already been held with existing facilities and are planned for newly in scope facilities. If you contact the EPR team at the email address at the end of this presentation, if you'd like more details on this. And for clarity, the legislation required for packaging EPR can still be made in absence of the Northern Ireland Executive. Next slide, please, Amy. Looking at the timeline overview, the key points are: from March 2023, producers will be required to collate packaging data in line with new regulations. And from January 2024, the scheme administrator will be in place following appointment by the end of 2023. The main statutory instrument to implement packaging EPR will come into force in 2024. This will replace the data reporting regulations as it contains the same requirements. From 2025, modulated fees will be introduced. This is variation of producer fees based on the recyclability of packaging they place on the market. The scheme administrator will be responsible for determining how fees are set and modulating these in line with regulations, and for demonstrating that modulation is achieving the desired policy outcomes, and that's that mainly more recyclable packaging is sold and less non-recyclable. Sampling regulations for material facilities will be introduced. There's a webinar on the 9th of February for newly in scope sites for the material facilities regulations. As these will be new regulations for Northern Ireland, I would encourage operators of facilities to attend this webinar. Next slide, please, Amy. From 2025, we will introduce a mandatory take-back requirement for fibre-based composite cups. Sellers of filled fibre-based composite cups that employ 10 or more full-time equivalent staff will be required to provide a dedicated bin for the separate collection of cups and report to the regulators the tonnage they have placed on the market and the tonnage they have collected and sent for recycling. Where a business joins a take-back scheme, this information can be reported through the take-back scheme to the regulator. From 2026, all packaging types, except for plastic films and flexibles, will be required to be labelled as recycle or do not recycle, and that's by March 2026. And from 2026, targets for fibre-based composite packaging will be introduced. By March 2027, plastic films and flexibles will need to be labelled as recycle or do not recycle, and plastic films will be collected from curbside alongside core packaging materials. Next slide, please, Amy. Now to go through the data reporting requirements. Organisations may need to act if you do any of the following: supply packaged goods to the UK market under your own brand, place goods into packaging that's unbranded when it's supplied, use transit packaging to protect goods during transport so they can be sold to UK consumers, import products in packaging, own an online marketplace, hire or loan out reusable packaging, or supply empty packaging. Next slide, please, Amy. If you're a UK organisation that handles and supplies packaging to consumers and businesses, you have to comply with extended producer responsibility for packaging. You may need to collect and submit data about packaging you have placed on the UK market. You will need to report packaging data if all of the following applies: You're an individual business, subsidiary or group, but not a charity. You have an annual turnover of 1 million or more based on your most recent annual accounts. And you're responsible for over 25 tonnes of packaging in a calendar year, and that's from January to December. If you're responsible for less than 25 tonnes of packaging in a calendar year and have a turnover of less than 1 million, you do not need to report packaging data. Next slide, please, Amy. I'm now going to give details on requirements for large organisations, and this will be followed by the small organisations. You will be classed as a large organisation if both of the following apply. You have an annual turnover of 2 million or more, and you should base your annual turnover on your most recent annual accounts. And you're responsible for handling and supplying more than 50 tonnes of empty packaging or packaging goods in the UK. Your total weight is the amount of packaging handled or supplied through the UK market in a calendar year that's running from January to December. Next slide, please, Amy. Large organisations need to submit data every 6 months. If you're classed as a large organisation, you'll need to submit your packaging data between the 1st of July 23 and the 1st of October 23. This should cover the packaging you've supplied from the 1st of January 23 to the 30th of June 23. For packaging you supply between the 1st of July 23 and the 31st of December 23, you'll need to submit your data between the 1st of January 24 and the 1st of April 24. Next slide, please, Amy. To comply with the regulations, you must take steps to record data about the empty packaging and packaged goods you handle and supply in the UK from the 1st of January 23. These regulations come into operation in March 23. Create an account and register your organisation from July 23. Pay a fee to the environmental regulator. Buy packaging recycling notes or packaging export recycling notes to meet your recycling obligations. Report data about empty packaging and packaged goods you handled or supplied through the UK market. Next slide, please, Amy. And this is small organisations. You're going to be classed as a small organisation of either of the following apply. Your annual turnover is between 1 million and 2 million, and you're responsible for handling and supplying more than 25 tonnes of empty packaging or packaging goods through the UK market. Your annual turnover is over 1 million, and you're responsible for handling and supplying between 25 tonnes and 50 tonnes of empty packaging or packaged goods through the UK market. If your annual turnover is more than 1 million and you're responsible for handling and supplying less than 25 tonnes of empty packaging or packaged goods through the UK market, you are not considered a small organisation. As with the large organisations, you should base your annual turnover on your most recent annual accounts, and your total weight is the amount of packaging handled or supplied through the UK market in a calendar year running from January to December. And for 2023, you're supplying data for the 2022 year. Next slide, please, Amy. Small organisations submit their data once a year. If you're classed as a small organisation, you'll need to submit your data between the 1st of January 24 and the 1st of April 24. And this should cover the packaging you've supplied from the 1st of January 23 to the 31st of January 23. Next slide, please, Amy. To comply with the regulations, you must take steps to record data about all the empty packaging and packaged goods you handle and supply through the UK market from the 1st of January 23. As already stated, these regulations come into operation in March 23. You need to create an account and register your organisation from January 2024. Pay an annual fee to the environmental regulator from 2024. And report data about empty packaging and packaging goods you handled or supplied through the UK market throughout 2023. Next slide, please, Amy. If you've registered for EPR for packaging as a parent company, you'll need to submit data for each of the subsidiaries within your group separately rather than as a combined group. You do not need to include any subsidiaries that have registered independently. If you're a parent company, group or subsidiary, for parent companies and their subsidiaries, there are different ways you can comply with the EPR for packaging. You can register as a whole group. In this instance, the parent company complies with EPR for packaging on behalf of every subsidiary within the group. As individual subsidiaries, in this instance, the subsidiaries that meet the turnover and tonnage requirements comply with EPR for packaging independently. As a parent company, for part of the group, this is where the parent company registers to comply with EPR for packaging on behalf of some, but not all of its subsidiaries. You should register as a parent company for part of the group if some of your subsidiaries do not meet the turnover and tonnage requirements in their own right, but do meet the requirements when combined. In this instance, the parent company will comply with EPR for packaging on behalf of the combined subsidiaries. The same thresholds of 1 million turnover and 25 tonnes or 2 million turnover and 50 tonnes apply. Next slide, please, Amy. You'll need to collect data about the packaging you've handled and supplied through the UK market. There are 4 parts to the data you collect about your packaging, and these are packaging data. This is how you put the packaging on the market. Supplied under your brand, packed or filled as unbranded, imported, supplied as empty, hired or loaned, supplied through an online marketplace that you own. Waste types. You'll also need to tell us what type of waste the packaging is likely to become when it's discarded. Large organisations will need to report whether the packaging is household waste, primary and shipment packaging, non-household waste, that's secondary and transit packaging, street bin waste. The data about the weight of packaging types that commonly end up in street bins. And there's examples on the DAERA web page, and there's links given on their last slide. A drinks container. You only need to do this for drinks containers that are put on the market in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Check the Scottish Deposit Return Scheme regulations if you sell drinks in Scotland. Reusable. You only need to submit information about reusable packaging such as pallets the first time that they're used. When you report your data in 2023, you should include any reusable packaging that's already in use. And self-managed waste. If you're a large organisation, you will need to report data about any household packaging waste you collect through a self-managed recycling scheme. This only applies to packaging waste that is not commonly collected by councils. Small organisations will need to report whether they have supplied packaging to the UK market that is a drinks container. They do not need to break down their data into the other waste streams. Packaging types, and that's primary, secondary, shipment or transit. Primary packaging is the individual container that you store goods in to sell to consumers. This includes multi-pack packaging. This is called a sales unit. Secondary packaging is for grouping several sales units for selling or shipping purposes. Organisations may also use secondary packaging to display goods in shops. Shipment packaging is for shipping single or multiple sales units directly to consumers. This includes cardboard boxes, bubble wrap and mail bags. Transit or tertiary packaging is used to group secondary packaging units together to protect them while they're being transported or handled through the supply chain. Transit packaging does not include road, rail, ship and air containers. And then final, packaging material and waste. The packaging material waste should be given in kilograms. You should categorise your data by the following materials, and I'm just going to list them. Alum, fibre-based composite, glass, paper or cardboard, plastic, steel, wood and other. And I just add that fibre-based composite is packaging material which is made of paperboard or paper fibres, laminated with plastic, and which may also have layers of other materials to form a single unit that cannot be separated by hand. Next slide, please, Amy. You may also have to report data about which country in the UK the packaging you supply to the customer is discarded in and becomes waste. This is called nation data. Nation data is information about which country in the UK your packaging has been sold, hired, loaned, gifted or discarded in. You'll need to submit data if you also do any of the following. Supply filled or empty packaging directly to consumers in the UK. Supply empty packaging to UK organisations that are not legally obligated under the regulations. Hire or loan out reusable packaging. Own an online marketplace where other organisations sell their empty packaging and packaged goods to UK consumers. Import packaging to the UK that you discard without selling or exporting it. And you must submit your nation data for the 2023 calendar year by the 1st of December 2024. Next slide, please, Amy. And this with regard to the obligation checker, and we've given the link there. Organisations that handle and supply, that is, create, import, distribute or sell packaging and packaged goods may be affected by EPR for packaging. You use the obligation checker tool to find out if regulations apply to you, whether you'll need to pay a fee, and what you need to do next to comply with the regulations. And in order to do this, you'll need to know your annual turnover, the ways that your organisation handles and supplies packaging, and the total weight in tonnes of packaging you handled and supplied in 2022. You do not need to report packaging data if you're a charity or a non-UK organisation that does not operate in the UK. Next slide, please, Amy. Data is required on all packaging that we put on the market. The regulations will apply to all UK organisations that handle and supply packaging to consumers and to businesses, with the exception of DRS containers in Scotland. Those placing non-household packaging onto the UK market will need to report it in line with the new EPR requirements and purchasing the PRNs in line with their subsequent recycling obligation. If you import into the UK market, the obligation is on who is importing the goods into the UK, not the importer. Data reporting is a UK producer responsibility. Regarding data reporting requirements for January and February, you're asked to collect data in January and February to report when required, but this will be mandatory from the 1st of March 2023. Producers should collect the data from the 1st of January. Where producers are not able to collect sufficient data for January and February, regulators will install a method to pro-rata PRN and EPR obligations based on submitted data to account for those months. Just an example of what data needs to be reported. As highlighted in a previous slide, data needs to be reported by packaging activity, waste type, package material and weight. EPR data specification and household packaging guidance will be released in the next few weeks. And it will contain guidance on how to submit your data, looking at the type of file to use and how to structure your data submission. There is a change in reporting from tonnes to kilograms. Self-managed waste is household packaging not commonly collected by councils for recycling, which an obligated producer collects and arranges for the recycling of themselves. The corresponding weight of eligible self-managed packaging is able to be discounted from a producer's EPR fee obligation. Businesses must report the amount of self-managed waste they collect on their EPR producer data submissions every 6 months. Next slide, please. Modulated fees. We are aiming to provide an indication of base fees for the 2024 payment shortly. We will provide more details on our approach to modulated fees in the summer of 2023. Will EPR reporting be linked with UK plastic packaging tax? These reports will need to be done separately. EPR is related to all packaging, whereas the UK plastic packaging tax reporting focuses on recycled content of plastic only. Materials included in the Scottish DRS will not be included in the package recycling note system. To support this, recycling targets have been held at the same level as 2022. Next slide, please, Amy. Guidance details are available online at the websites highlighted on the slide. Further guidance will be issued on how to submit your data, looking at the type of file to use and how to structure your data submission. EPR data specification and household packaging guidance will be released in the next few weeks. I'd encourage you to sign up to the packaging newsletter sent out by DEFRA on behalf of the Four Nations. The link's on this slide. This will also give details and links to guidance and other webinars, including one on definitions and data reporting on Wednesday the 15th of February. Please feel free to pass these details on to other relevant parties. Please use the obligation checker and read the online guidance. And if after this you have any further queries, email the address on the screen for the DAERA EPR team. Thanks for listening, and I'll pass you back to Janice. Next slide, please, Amy.
Thanks very much, Christine. You covered an absolute mass of detail there, which I hope everyone found useful. But thank goodness that this webinar is being recorded and those slides will be made available, because you packed in an awful lot there. We're going to do this week quick poll here, but after this we're going into a Q&A session. So now is the time, if you have any questions on that information, to submit it through the Q&A panel on the right hand side of your screen, and direct your questions to all panelists. So this poll question, the data reporting system will go live around July 2023. And our regulators in Northern Ireland Environment Agency would like to offer some data clinics with live demonstrations of how to use the new system. So I think businesses have found this sort of thing helpful in the past when new obligations have been introduced. So this question is to gauge whether you would be interested in attending such an event. Again, please submit your answer via the poll panel. While results come in for that poll, I will welcome Leslie Roberts from the packaging policy team, and also Diane Carlisle from NIA, who will answer any questions that you have submitted. Now, Amy, do we have the results of the poll?
Yes, thanks, Janice. So that's 30 people saying that would be helpful, and that's out of 60 or also on the call at the minute. So a majority of those who've answered, yeah.
Very surprising. Yeah, I think that's a wise idea. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thanks.
Okay, so next slide, please. So while we've been talking, Charmaine has been working away in the background there. She heads up the packaging policy team. So she's been sorting through your questions and assigning them to our panel. So we'll hear from them shortly. But first, with Chair's prerogative, I have a couple of questions myself that I think are fairly straightforward that I'd like to ask the panel. Diane, I'll start with the first question to you. Could you please tell me what IT system will be used for new packaging EPR? Will it still be the old faithful National Packaging Waste Database? We'd appreciate an answer on that.
Thanks, Janice. Yes, I think as you've alluded to, there is a new digital IT system being developed by DEFRA for producer and compliance scheme registration and data submission. So as ever, as soon as it's ready, we will be letting producers and compliance schemes know about it. And as the poll alluded to, we will hope to run demonstrations of the new IT system when it is available. Probably both online and maybe in person, because sometimes a big screen to see things can be helpful. And we will anticipate doing those in summer 2023.
That's brilliant, Diane. Thank you. And sort of another one on the same thing. Could you tell me, please, in what format do packaging producers need to submit their data?
Yes, well, schemes at present, compliance schemes at present, already provide a data upload in terms of submitting their data to MPWD. So similarly to this, under the new system, now both producers and compliance schemes will have to submit an upload. So the format of that is still being worked out. But just to point that out, that it is slightly different to what is being done now by producers on MPWD. Again, I'd draw your attention to our quite probably in-person and online demonstrations in summer 2023, and we'll be able to demonstrate that for people to hopefully ease out some of the wrinkles for them. And I would also point out DEFRA are currently finalising guidance on the process and on submitting data, and it will be available very shortly.
Thanks very much, Diane. So just one final question then for you, Leslie, and it's sort of two-parter around fees. Firstly, when will the base fees for the 2024 payments be published? I think it would be helpful to know that. And then related to that, what about the modulated fee structure for the 2024 data for 2025 payment? When will we see more about that?
Okay, thanks for the question, Janice. Well, we are aiming to provide an indication of base fees for the 2024 payment shortly, and we will be providing more details on the approach to modulating fees in the summer of 2023.
Thanks very much, Leslie. So I can see that we have a lot of questions in here, some assigned to both of you, I think. So Leslie, would you mind, could you have a look at those questions and take us through some answers where you can?
Okay, we have a couple here about registering with compliance schemes. So I just want to confirm then that you can still register through a compliance scheme, or you can register directly with the regulator. So if you're currently registered with a compliance scheme, you can still use them. There's another questions here about meetings being recorded. So yes, where these webinars are available, we will be recording them. And there's a question on if you're supplying to UK retailers and you're supplying branded goods, do you need to report on these? And the obligation there is with the brand owner. So if you're supplying branded goods, it is with the person that you're supplying those branded goods to fulfill their obligations then. Can I now pass back to yourself there, Janice?
Okay, thanks, Leslie. And Diane, I believe you've had some assigned to you as well.
Yes, yes, thanks, Janice. I've had a few questions in on PRNs. So just to emphasise again that if you are classed as a large organisation, you'll still have to purchase PRNs and PERNs. And when these have to be purchased by the large organisations, I understand that will be once your obligation is known, which is when your full set of data has been reported for 2023. And if I could also pick up on another question, which says, does this mean that reporting on MPWD will no longer be required? I'd just like to emphasise that the 2007 packaging waste regulations are still in force, so they still have to be complied with as usual for this year, for 2023. The point of the data reporting under the new SR for us is that you're collecting the data for next year's EPR. Similar to the system we have now, but just to emphasise, you still need to register for packaging handled, all the rest of it in 2022. You'll still need to register by the 7th or 15th of April this year, as normal.
Okay, thank you. Now I saw a couple more coming in, and I don't know if they were assigned to you, Leslie, were they? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, there's a couple here I just want to go through on the detail. They're quite detailed here, so I'm just taking a moment to go through them, and then I'll come back to answer.
Okay, we can maybe mark that up at the end then. If you don't have any more, Diane, we could move forward.
Well, I just have a very quick one, and it's probably what everybody's wanting to know about templates being available. Now, my understanding is at the minute that there will be templates of some description. I haven't had sight of them. They're still in development, but I understand that there will be assistance in the form of templates to enable you to upload the data.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll maybe conclude this Q&A now, but because we have got a wee bit of time allocated at the end to mop up and give Leslie a chance to digest some of those longer questions. So next slide, please, then, Amy. So now we're going to move on to an update on deposit return schemes. So another quick poll question, which is simply, have you experience of actually using a DRS for drinks containers? There's some examples in Australia or Norway or Germany. So again, if you wouldn't mind submitting your answer on the poll panel on the right-hand side of your screen. While you're answering that, I will introduce Robert McLaughlin from the DRS policy team. Many of you will be aware that we published our response to the 2020 consultation on the 20th of January this year, which confirmed a go live date of 2025 for DRS in Northern Ireland. So Robert is going to tease out for us how that scheme will be designed and implemented here. Now, Amy, I see, do we have the results of the polling?
Yes, we have the majority of results in here. So we have 5 people who've had the opportunity to actually use a DRS in person before. Whether that's through a reverse vending machine, I don't know, but they've been over maybe in Europe to use the system. So that's it for that poll. Thank you.
Okay, so not very many at all. It's going to be a steep learning curve for everyone then. Thank you, Amy. Next slide then, please. It's over to Robert.
Thanks, Janice. Welcome, everyone. And as Janice mentioned, I'm going to talk through the deposit return scheme that will be introduced for Northern Ireland, England and Wales for single-use drinks containers. A deposit return scheme, or DRS, is a producer responsibility scheme designed for a very specific material stream. Introducing a DRS is a joint policy programme across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. As Janice mentioned, the scheme is due to go live on the 1st of October 2025. Scotland have developed a separate scheme which is due to go live on the 16th of August this year, and Ireland will go live in 2024. There have been 2 consultations on DRS in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, one in 2019 and the other in 2021. The 2021 consultation received 2,590 total responses, and 83% of those respondents expressed support for DRS. Next slide, please, Amy. So, deposit return schemes are tried and tested and are being used in many countries around the world to achieve high recycling rates, such as 96% in Germany. Many more nations are introducing deposit return schemes to meet higher recycling targets and get segregated material of high quality to be made back in the bottles, which our curbside collections don't achieve. DRS promotes a more circular economy by improving the local source of high quality material for production and removes the need to import recycled material. What producers need back is clean, segregated material to enable bottle-to-bottle recycling. Increasing the amount of recycled PET available to remake bottles as a result will reduce the use of virgin materials when manufacturing bottles, which is more carbon intensive. A small proportion of DRS containers will continue to remain in council waste streams, such as curbside collections, where the consumer decides to forgo their deposit. Councils and, where relevant, waste operators can participate in DRS by separating out the containers and redeeming the deposit on the item. This was option 1 set out in the consultation. Next slide, please, Amy. So in this slide, you'll see the highlights from the government response, which I'll share further detail in coming slides. The regulations will be brought forward in England and Northern Ireland in a joint statutory instrument, and Wales will bring forward a separate regulations in parallel through their Senate. Next slide, please, Amy. So materials and scope. The materials and scope of DRS are PET plastic bottles and cans made of steel and aluminium from 50 ml to 3 litres. Glass bottles will not be included in Northern Ireland DRS initially, but we'll keep this position under review. Glass drinks bottles will be obligated under EPR for packaging. Refill containers will be excluded, as will HDPE plastic, as 81% of this is used for milk. Takeaway coffee cups will not be included in DRS, and any other materials not mentioned above will be covered by EPR. There was an overwhelming support, 95% in fact, for introducing some form of mandatory labelling through the DRS logo or similar. All 3 nations intend to mandate the use of a mark to identify the product as part of a DRS, an identification marker such as a barcode or QR code to enable the container to be recognised at a return point. Specific details of the design will be determined by the DMO. DRS will have a joint 3-nation approach, although the scope in Wales will be slightly different as they will include glass bottles. We're in regular communication with colleagues in Scotland and Ireland to ensure that we obtain lessons learned from their approaches and prevent any unintended consequences to businesses and to the public. Next slide, please, Amy. So a key benefit of the scheme is increasing recycling rates, and we will be placing ambitious targets on the DMO to achieve these. The collection target will be phased in at 70% in year 1, 80% in year 2, and 90% in year 3 onwards. The reporting period will be based on the calendar year from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. Monetary penalties will be imposed on the DMO by regulations where the DMO fails to meet its collection targets. Ensuring an effective compliance and monitoring and enforcement scheme is in place is essential to the successful delivery of the scheme. The regulations will place specific obligations on some scheme on scheme participants such as producers, retailers and the DMO. The DMO will undertake the initial monitoring and compliance to ensure businesses are complying with the regulations. The DMO will be able to escalate persistent and major breaches to the regulator, who would be NIEA and here in Northern Ireland. We would envisage the same individual within NIEA would look after stakeholders on both EPR and DRS. Can we get the next slide, please, Amy? So the government response sets out that a deposit management organisation will be appointed to manage the overall operation of the deposit return scheme. DRS will be an industry-led and the DMO will be an independent, non-for-profit private organisation. Its membership will be made up of individual companies or trade associations which represent producers and retailers. Given that there are 2 legally separate schemes, 2 separate DMO applications will be required, one for England and Northern Ireland and one for Wales. We are very aware how the island of Ireland operates for the drinking industry, and we're eager that the DMO appointment process will fully consider this. Next slide, please, Amy. So there are 3 main funding streams for DRS. First is producer fees. Second will be revenue from selling collected material to reprocessors. And third will be unredeemed deposits, where containers aren't returned into the scheme. We expect fees to be proportionate to the types and volumes of material and quantity of in-scope containers a producer places on the market. Recognising the cost burden on the scheme on smaller producers, the regulations will require the DMO to take into account the size of the producer when setting the fees. The DMO will be responsible for setting the deposit level which can be fixed or variable, and a maximum level will be set in legislation. The DMO will also be responsible for sourcing the finance to fund the setup of costs of the scheme. Next slide, please, Amy. So retailers selling in-scope containers will be required to host a return point where consumers can return empty containers and be given back their deposit, subject to some specific exemptions that retailers can apply for. The DMO will be obligated to consider the strategic placement of return points to ensure a sensible geographic spread. An exemption service to operate in the return point will be administered by the DMO to support retailers in seeking an exemption where it may not be appropriate for them to take containers back. The 2 criteria that will be set out in regulations for an exemption will be breach of health and safety and close proximity to another return point. The government also details examples of reasonable excuses to refuse the return of containers, which include the refusal on religious or ethical grounds, for example, where alcoholic drink containers will be returned for an outlet that maybe wouldn't sell them. Retailers will receive a handling fee from the DMO to provide reimbursement for the costs incurred in hosting a return point. This will be set by the DMO and reviewed on a regular basis. We recognise the challenges in setting up a take-back service for online sales and want to continue to work with industry on this, focusing on larger grocery retailers offering a take-back service. Where containers are sold in a closed-loop environment, such as pubs, hotels, restaurants and cafes, the retailer can opt not to pass a deposit on and avoid hosting a return point on the basis that they will keep the container on site for collection by the DMO. We are aware that Welsh Government continue to host further trials on curbside digital DRS. Many elements of digital DRS systems are now in place, such as high-speed printing and smartphone technology, but there's not an off-the-shelf implementation plan. We are also aware that there may not be the technology in some smaller retailers' IT systems that would be compatible with the new labelling. We want to ensure that legislation future-proofs the development of DRS, and the DMO will decide the best method to adopt to achieve the quality and quantity required. Next slide, please, Amy. So the regulations will set out a commencement date for DRS of the 1st of October 2025. We continue to work with industry to assess the feasibility of this date as more detail is developed on the implementation phases of the scheme, including as part of the DMO application process. There's 3 phases to delivering DRS. Phase 1 will be the government activity up to the DMO appointment. We're aiming to have the regulations complete by the end of 2023. We will then appoint a DMO with the intention of announcing appointed DMO in spring 2024. Phase 2 will be the DMO setup. This will be the appointments, the contractual partners, and the decision making. And phase 3 will be the DRS rollout, the physical implementation of the infrastructure, and the collection arrangements. Stakeholder engagement has been ongoing from we published our government response on the 20th of January, and it will continue to cut across all the implementation required, including Northern Ireland stakeholders, which many of them, I'm sure, are on this call today and have been on several workshops before. I'd just like to take the time to thank everybody for attending today, and I'll pass you all back to Janice. Thanks, Janice.
Thank you, Robert. Really good, really clearly set out. So while we get ready to answer DRS questions, here we have another poll. So Robert mentioned in his presentation there that a maximum deposit level will be specified in legislation. So we'd like your view on what this should be. Again, please submit your answers via the poll panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So while you're answering that, just a reminder to please do keep your questions coming in, and we'll answer as many as we can before we conclude this webinar. Again, we ask you to direct your questions to all panelists through the Q&A function on the right-hand side of the screen. Please, at this stage, also include any questions on the packaging data reporting if you have thought of anything further during Robert's presentation, because we will aim to mop up that after the DRS Q&A session. So now I'll also welcome back Charmaine Beer to the panel to answer your DRS questions along with Robert. And we'll turn now to Amy and ask if the results of the poll are in.
Okay, thank you. So we have the majority going for 30p maximum deposit level, and the second highest, most favoured result is 50p. But yeah, a bit varied there with others selecting 40 and higher. So.
Okay, all right. Well, useful to get us a straw poll in this one anyway, and we'll be discussing this further with our colleagues across the water in due course. Thanks very much, Amy. And next slide, please. So Now, this is the deposit return scheme Q&A, and again with Chair's prerogative, I want to ask a couple of questions first. I'll just give Robert a little time to catch his breath and ask you, Charmaine, something that we're asked from time to time, which is, will DAERA consider introducing an all-island DRS scheme?
Okay, thanks, Janice. So people involved heavily in DRS will be aware that the Republic of Ireland is going ahead with their DRS in 2024. So we're just working with the three nations, with England and Wales, to bring in this scheme. And we work across packaging, really across all of the UK. That's been the approach for a long time, and it's one that's where stakeholders are largely satisfied with. As Robert mentioned, we're very, very aware of the issues around all-island movement of goods and how some of the drinks market operates on the island of Ireland. So that'll be something we'll closely consider when appointing a DMO. The operability of these two schemes working together has to be obviously managed really well.
Okay, thanks very much, Charmaine. And again, another question that we get asked from time to time: why haven't we included glass in DRS in Northern Ireland?
Yes, so England and Northern Ireland are not including glass at this time, and that's really to just reduce the complexity to get the scheme going and to improve the performance of the scheme. Now, the glass sector have publicly stated that they aim to hit a recycling rate of 90% by 2030. One thing that we will be doing is looking really closely on how glass recycling progresses after implementation of DRS, and it would be something that we'll review at a later date, and should we need to bring in a DRS for glass, that would be fully considered.
Okay, thanks very much, Charmaine, very helpful. So I can see, Robert, that you have some questions there, so if you wouldn't mind taking through what you have and trying to answer them as best you can.
Can you hear me okay, Janice?
Yes, I can, Robert.
Yeah, okay. So a few questions in here. So the first one is, how does an individual claim back the deposit? So in designing the scheme of DRS, we would like to make it as easy to buy a container as it is to return a container. So where you purchase the container and outlets that sell in-scope containers are going to be required to host a return point, and that will be through a manual take back or a reverse vending machine. Another question that's come in is, how will you prevent materials from moving between regions with different DRS approaches and DMOs? So within regulations, each nation will intend to clearly mark in-scope containers and those retail outlets that host those in-scope containers. So it'll be clearly marked for a DRS container within England, Northern Ireland and Wales. And then those retail outlets that will host a return point will have a clear identifier at that outlet as well. Another question is, will the square footage of the retailer stores be taken into consideration when selecting a deposit point? So initially, all retailers that sell in-scope containers will be obliged to host a return point. They can apply for exemptions, as has set out in the government response, under health and safety reasons and close proximity to another return point. It's important to mention that retailers will be provided a retailer handling fee for hosting a return point and to compensate them on any costs incurred of hosting a return point. But it's also important to note that they'll not be compensated for the additional administration requirements, just that of hosting the return point. I'm just having a quick check to see if there's anything else. So how do material operators actually redeem foregone deposits? So with the requirements set out by the DMO of how an in-scope container will be required to be returned back, so within that the container must be empty, the label must be able to be read. So those material operators, if they can separate those containers out of their curbside collections or existing waste streams and they're intact, they can scan the code and redeem the deposit. And if we use Scotland's example or Ireland's example of 15 cent and 25 cent or 20 pence, the material is a lot more valuable than what it currently is in curbside collections. And the last question I see there Janice, is how will drinks in multi-packs be dealt with? So all containers will have a deposit on them. Within our regulations, we plan to allow the deposit management organisation to set a variable deposit rate, so that will be up to the deposit management organisation what they set that as, and how they manage that going forward. So that could be Ireland's example on that would be a lower fee for smaller containers and a larger fee for larger containers. So we would envisage that would be a similar outlet, but again, that will be for the deposit management organisation to decide. That's all I have there in front of me at the minute, Janice.
Okay, thanks very much, Robert. I'll just check, Charmaine, that nothing has come in for you while Robert was speaking.
Yeah, there's one that's just come in there.
Oh.
There's one that's just come in about manual take back. How a retailer is to fund deposits. So again, that would be to do with the labelling. So if it's not being read by an RVM machine, some smaller stores who don't have room for like a reverse vending machine or don't want one could manually take the items back, and they'd have to, scan it and redeem the deposits then through an electronic system.
Okay, thanks very much, both of you. So that would conclude then the Q&A session for DRS. So we can move on then, please. Next slide then, please, Amy. So we're hoping we get maybe a bit of a change in response to this poll. This is the question that you were asked earlier. So following this session, how prepared do you now feel for packaging EPR and DRS? Again, please use the poll panel on the right hand side of your screen. While you're answering that, I'll bring back Leslie and Diane as well to complete the panel, and we'll see if there are further questions to be answered. Again, we'll put this recording slides and any answers to questions that we don't get to up on our website. And also I would encourage you to sign up to the newsletter and webinars which are aimed at helping you. So Amy, I think you should be able to let us have the results of the poll.
Yeah, so there's still a little bit of time to keep responding if you haven't already, but it's encouraging to see that there's no longer anybody clicking not prepared at all. So some people maybe have learned something from today, and yeah, we're glad to just have updated you a little bit more. So we now have it's difficult whenever the percentages aren't working out, but there's 17, 18 people saying they're moderately prepared now, which is the majority.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. I mean, that's
Thank
really good to hear. Obviously, we'll keep plugging away so that everyone is comfortable with these new obligations in time. So next slide then, please, Amy. Okay, so we have a bit of time now to mop up questions. So I think there were some for Leslie and maybe Diane that haven't been answered, and I know that Robert has one there that was just assigned. So maybe if I turn to each of you in turn, you could take us through whatever questions you have, starting with Leslie.
Yeah, we have a question here about a small wholesaler and who buys good from a branded producer and then sells on to customers, and was wanting to know what their responsibility was. The responsibility is with a branded owner when they place on the market. However, I would suggest that we use the obligation checker, because being a small wholesaler and the de minimis and the reporting requirements, and then they were unsure as well about primary and secondary, and the secondary packaging will come under recycling obligations for the packaging recycling notes. So I would suggest using that obligation checker there, because there's a couple of different points within that. And then there's another question here about being part of a global manufacturing company, and they make a small component shipped to another facility outside the UK. So we're looking at a packaging that's placed on the market in the UK. And they are saying that their UK facility does not ship directly to consumers. If that did go within the UK and it was a business to business, then we would need to see evidence that could be such like invoicing. The regulators will be producing guidance on what evidence they will be handling for business to business consumers as well. And then the fact that they do use reusable containers to ship components. Again, if that's on the UK market and it's a reusable container, it would need to be reported for the first time that it's used. Again, I would suggest that the obligation checker is used for this as well. That's the last for me. As I say, another one there we've already covered with if it's a brand owner, but if you're not the brand, if it's not a brand owner, then you'd need to check your own obligations.
Thanks very much, Leslie. Diane, just checking with you if you have anything else.
Thanks, Janice. Yes, I have a couple here. So one question is for companies who have robust systems in place for current packaging regulations, will they need to change how they collect and report data? So I would suggest in that instance, well, first of all, just to get it off my chest, you will be reporting in kilograms rather than tons as before, so that needs to be factored in. But I think I think if it was me, what I'd do is I'd look at what data has to be reported, and then I would look at how I'm collecting the data and see if the way I'm collecting the data will enable me to report the data that will now be required under EPR for packaging. Just bearing in mind that the activities have changed. There's no longer the split obligation. It's now the pack filler or brand owner. For example, for materials, we now have the addition of the fibre-based composites as a new material, which we didn't previously have. And we also have the whole topic of waste type. You're splitting into household, non-household, street bin waste, drinks containers, and so on. So I really would, I think, look at how data is to be reported and then trace that back to how the data is being collected by yourself and see if the two will fit. So that's that one. And then probably following on slightly from what Leslie was mentioning there, again, we are essentially talking about packaging placed on the market in the UK. So the question was, when reporting, do we exclude all packaging sold in ROI? And so the answer is yes to that. And obviously retain evidence of export. Should we come out and drop your door and have a chat with you? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Diane. What about Robert? I think you had one or two there that came in at the end.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Janice?
Yes, go ahead, Robert.
So yeah, we've had a couple of questions come in then, so I'll take them in reverse order. Are retailers required to build up funds to fulfill deposits, or is this claimed back? So as the retailer sells the drink, they will place a deposit on it and they'll get that off the consumer. Then whenever the consumer returns the container, they will refund the deposit and take the empty container. When the deposit management organization collects those empty containers, they will bring them to their warehouse, and if it's done through an RVM, there'll be an automatic count done on those containers that have been returned and an amount calculated. If it's done through manual take back, of how it's done in other schemes, it's put into a bag and it's sealed with a barcode on it, and when it comes to accounting centre, that bag is checked by the accounting centre, which is owned by the deposit management organisation, and then that amount is refunded back to the retailer for the number of containers that have come from their outlet. I hope that covers that. So how is DRS accounting for PET soft drinks bottles with shrink films on outer? This is predominant on a lot of soft drinks, multi-layer structures. So any PET bottle within scope of a soft drink or single-use drinks container will be within scope of the deposit return organisation. So the deposit return scheme, so that will be subject to a deposit and will fall into the scheme. And then just the final one I have there is just clarification on multi-packs, that you don't buy them individually, they're packaged in a box. So yeah, that's I think I covered that previously, but just for clarification, a 6-pack of a soft drink will have 6 deposits on it, and it will can be redeemed individually as those cans are returned, or if those 6 cans are drunk and returned in one go, it'll be the 6 deposits returned. Every single container within scope of deposit return will have a deposit on it. So yeah, Janice, that's all I have there.
Thanks, Robert. Very clear. And then just checking finally with you, Charmaine, if anything was assigned to you.
There's one more that's just come in on DRS that I'll take. Can a retailer stop being a deposit return point by stopping selling drinks in the store? In theory, yes, because only stores that sell drinks would be deposit return points. So probably quite extreme example, but yes, in theory they could.
Okay.
I think that's them all answered.
Oh, wow, thank you very much. There was a lot of questions there. Thank all the panelists very much for that. Found that very helpful indeed. So that concludes our Q&A session, the final Q&A session. And if we just go to the next slide, that's the last slide then. We're going to give you a bit of time back today, I suspect. So all that remains for me to do today is to thank the panel and our host, Amy, and to thank you all for your attendance today. I'm grateful for your participation in our polls and for your questions, which are really helpful to us, and I hopefully we helped you too. If there are any specific topics you wish to see us cover on future webinars, please feel free to type those into the Q&A function now before you log off, and we can pick that up after the event. But before you go, here's a reminder of the guidance available and a link to the EPR DRS newsletter. So finally, as I said, everything that we've presented today will be made available on our website along with the recording of today's event. So all it remains for me to say is goodbye and thank you for your attendance today. Thank you.